to Just Salvos. This week we're talking all about surrender, the movement, the conference, the Truth Labs, and we've got the director of Surrender, Dusk here. Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well. Can you tell us first up, what is Surrender?
Okay, so Surrender was birthed out of Urban Neighbours of Hope, and it had been running for 8 years. And over the last few years, it's been birthed to a whole group of partner organisations that have taken Surrender under their wing. And it's evolved not just from a conference, it's evolved into a network, a movement and a message that is calling Australian Christians to engage in a personal connection to poverty.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about more about the partners. Who are the partners?
Okay, so the partners are Urban Seed, Concern Australia, Jesus One Time, Tier Australia, VCCE, Just Salvos, of course, and we've just had Praxis come on as a sponsor as well. So there's 8 in total, and it's a fantastic bunch of people and organisations who are not just talking about the message but embodying it in their work. All
right, so who are some of the people that we've got or that we've just had at the conference that we had this year?
Okay, so we had Shane Claiborne. He was fantastic. We also had Pro Parv, who comes from Dusk in Cambodia, and Dusk is one of Tier Australia's partner organisations. We also had a lot of different Indigenous speakers, from Graham Poulsen to Billy Williams, and a lot of other people. We had Crossflow, which are an amazing bunch of musicians who ministered to us through their worship and their music.
So what is the difference between Surrender conference and any other conference that I can go to as a Christian? What sets Surrender apart?
So Surrender really provides a platform for voices that don't get a lot of airplay in our churches. So on the Saturday night, the whole night is handed over to the Indigenous partners who minister to us and share with us their heart and their story. And it's just a beautiful thing to just sit and hear the unheard stories that don't often get told in our churches. We have representatives from so many different groups. There's a bunch of Burmese refugees who come and serve food to us. From the cafe that's now is setting up a cafe in Springvale called Free Burma, and these guys come, and it's not just about the food, the menu is the message.
It's amazing. I have been to Surrender, and I've got to say, even just the vibe is just a group of people whose heart is just longing to serve Christ in a way that also serves the world. And that we don't always get that balance right, do we?
Often, particularly Surrender is a conference that specifically engages young people. And so often, we grow up in church and we're told, that we have this personal God, that we just worship him and he looks after us. But, as we come to look at the scriptures and come to look at the Gospels, we realise that, God is not just a personal God, but he's a God of the world, and he calls us not just to serve, him for ourselves, but to engage in the work that he's doing in the world.
Yeah, I imagine it must absolutely break God's heart to see the amount of injustice and oppression and just death in the world that happens just unnecessarily. And so really, is Surrender about a call for us to get involved in that work?
Yeah, look, and there's no, Surrender doesn't have any specific boxes, come to Surrender and then go into this area. It's really just about coming and hearing Jesus's call to the margins and being reminded of, how he lived his life in the Gospels and what that means for us today. So people come and they might be, a high-flying lawyer, and it's not about them just giving up their job and moving to a poor neighbourhood, but looking at how they live out their vocation as a lawyer. And, they might then choose to volunteer at a community lawyer service once a month. Or, it's just about people hearing, what God is saying to them and how they can live it out in their lives.
Yeah. Well, we've got a clip of Mckenna, and he was one of the speakers at Surrender this year, and he's a regular on Just Salvos. So we just hope you enjoy this clip.
Because they believe that we witness to God's love by living God's love. See, this isn't just about being like Jesus or loving like Jesus. This is about Jesus actually loving through us. By grace, God wants to take your life and love through you with a power that is not your own, that has little to do with you and everything to do with us getting out of the way and that love breaking in. our gospel is such good news to our world today. And it takes ordinary, amazing friends like these. Simon Moyle's here tomorrow. He's coming back from Afghanistan. I hope you get to hang out. Jess is here already. Donna, Julie. And what incredible, our own Martin Luther King, in terms of this incredible Christian Aboriginal man, Vincent Lingiari, and what he has achieved. These are stories we must be telling. But more than that, we must be telling the story. The invitation tonight is not to love like Jesus. The question isn't what would Jesus do? He's risen. It's what's Jesus doing? And are you ready to let the love that raised Jesus from the grave move through you? Are you ready for the kind of life that leaves behind boring, rigid, religious legalism for the exciting journey that moves beyond fundamentalism and beyond liberalism into discipleship, into just following this amazing God that we serve?
Jared Mckenna there, loving through us. Is that what Jesus is doing? What does that mean?
It's interesting just watching that clip. It reminds me of the beginning of the year. I spent some time going around and visiting Surrender's partner organisations and just seeing some of the work they do and seeing how, each of the people in those organisations just allow Jesus to love through them. So for example, Urban Seed, they love people through hospitality. Every week they put on meals for people who are living in the city, living rough. They can come in, share a meal, but also just sit with people and be treated with respect and dignity and, a mutuality. I remember visiting some of the projects that Concern runs, and seeing homework clubs where, kids that have come here from other countries and really struggle with the education system are, sitting in a room. And I sat with one girl and the food came out and she's kind of trying to do her work and she grabs a cheese stick and puts it in her pocket. And then she grabs another one and she grabbed about 5 and she put them in the pocket and she said, these are for my brothers and sisters at home. And here, you see people being welcomed into an environment where, they get to meet other people who show them the love of Jesus and literally sit next to them and engage in their lives and their stories. And it's just beautiful. And lastly, another opportunity I had was to visit the guys from Jesus One Time up in Brisbane. And they are just pouring themselves into running courses for Indigenous people in Bible training. And, they get to do it in a way that is really culturally relevant and it's relational and it's just brilliant. And these guys just, they're just loving and showing Jesus through the work that they're doing.
The thing that I love about Surrender is just this opportunity to really see some of the work that actually is happening around in our community, stuff that we can immediately get involved in.
Yeah.
But also it's a way of really showing, how you and your church, even if they're not doing much, can actually get involved in this movement towards justice. And Shane Claiborne had some interesting stuff to say about that, so we'll have a look at that now.
It's great to be here. And I love this idea of bringing together prayer and action, because I think that one of my buddies said it well. He says, I find myself rather lonely these days because I'm around a lot of inactive believers and worn out activists. We need folks that are putting together prayer and action. And I don't know how we ever separated these things that have to go together. But, I grew up in a very prayerful, Christian world down in Hick Country in the Bible Belt in East Tennessee. And, I can remember growing up and, what Christians did was pray. And I can remember one of my friend's kids, he had a very skewed understanding of prayer. And he said one night before he was going off to bed, he said, before I go to sleep, I'm going to pray. Does anybody want anything? And I just think of myself growing up and thinking so often we use prayer almost as to dodge any responsibility, you know. So whenever somebody had something come up, we'd just be like, "Oh, I'll pray for you," and you knew full well that meant they weren't going to do a blessed anything else about it, you know. And I know that one of the guys that's taught me that prayer and action have to go together is Dr. John Perkins that Ash mentioned. He's an activist for decades and decades, a contemporary of Dr. Martin Luther King. And one of the things he said is, we got to be people of prayer. But after week, if you hear somebody praying, saying that they need a wheelchair ramp, you just need to get off your knees and get some carpenters together and build a wheelchair ramp, you know, because sometimes we realize that God wants to use us to be a part of the answer to our prayers. That and so often we kind of use it as an excuse to just put everything back on God. But I think a lot of times when we say to God, "God, why don't you do something about the pain of the world?" If we listen real close, we can hear God say, "I did do something. I made you. You're to be my hands and my feet." And so this idea of prayer, I want us to think a little bit on a couple of different aspects that we've been thinking a lot about prayer, because I had like 30 friends that I wrote the Common Prayer book together, and it was just a beautiful experience. So we spent a lot of time, because we have an activist community. You know, we were born out of injustice, and that's what pulled us together, but we're learning to pray together. And I think of some of the people that I think of that have most deeply moved the world. They've been people that have a deep personal prayer life, a love relationship with Jesus. You know, and one of those is Mother Teresa. I love one of the times there was this journalist that asked her a question, and he said, "Mother Teresa, are you married?" Which I thought was a weird question, you know, for Mother Teresa. But her answer was awesome. She said, "I am in love, and sometimes my spouse can be so demanding, but I am in love." And then this journalist asked Mother Teresa, "When you pray, what do you say to God?" And she said, "Sometimes I don't say anything, I just listen." And then the journalist was a little puzzled and said, "Well, what does God say to you?" And she said, "Sometimes God just listens." And there comes, I think, a place where part of prayer is just resting in the presence of God and hearing the gentle whisper that we are loved. And some of us need to know that, because we end up kind of working, trying to prove that we have meaning and value in the world. And sometimes we just need to be still. And I think of one of my heroes who is a Franciscan monk, and he's gone to jail over and over protesting nuclear weapons. And there was a friend of mine that asked him, how do you keep the momentum? You know, you're like 70 years old. How are you still doing it? And he said, "Every morning I wake up and I crawl into a little ball and I lay beneath the cross and I listen to Jesus tell me how much he loves me." And so I think that there's that part of us that needs to hear that whisper that we're loved.
I love it when I can hear Christians talk about their faith where it's active, where we can be spiritual, yes, but actually our Christian lives mean something to other people.
Yeah.
Is that what we get from Surrender?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we have coming up in September some Truth Labs. Surrender Truth Labs are one-night events where you can, you know, get a little piece of surrender, but just in one night. And we're running a Truth Lab with Jared Mckenna called Church in the Hood. And this night is about, you know, looking at how, as churches, we can be flesh and blood in our communities. And it will be a fantastic night and a great opportunity to actually explore that, because often we can hear this stuff and think, that's great, but how do we live that out? And how do we live that out as a church community? And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah. I want to also say that, you know, the message of surrender, not surrender itself, but the message of surrender is actually not an optional extra to your Christian faith. That actually to be a Christian is to be a person of justice, that's God's heart beats for justice, and actually we need to follow him. And he, you know, numerous accounts in both the Old and New Testament of Jesus standing up, of God standing up for the most oppressed in society. it's not an optional extra, it's something that we all must do. And I find surrender really helpful to be able to just remind me of that constantly, because it's hard to remember that in our very commercial lives. But also to give really practical tools and helpful tools. Also just being exposed to all the partner organisations who, So how do I get to know more about surrender?
Yep.
Where do I have to go?
Okay, you can visit the website www.surrender.org.au. We also have a fantastic Facebook page, so you can just type in surrender and up it'll come. If you want to experience a little bit of Surrender 11, if you didn't get to be there, you can order the DVDs online and hear more and more of Jared and Shane and all the other fantastic speakers that we had over the weekend.
Sensational. So we'll have all of that information on our website at justsalvos.com. And we'll also have all that information as well, including this episode, which you might have found, on our Facebook, facebook.com/justsalvos. Dusk, thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
And thank you and bless you for all the work that you do for Surrender. It is a lot of work and we just love you for it. And we really just hope that you can get on board and support Surrender and the message of surrender. Thanks for being with us.